Imagine waking up on January 1st, and by December 31st, almost half of the entire monetary value of your country has just, well, vanished.
Yeah, it's a number that almost defies macroeconomic modeling. I mean, when an economy contracts by nearly half in just 12 months, the formal structures of society basically cease to exist.
Right. And today we have this incredibly rare opportunity to trace the shockwaves of that exact event and, more importantly, the really remarkable recovery that followed. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
And to you, our listeners, sitting there right now, thank you. You've handed us a truly monumental source document today.
We are looking at a 15-page, multi-dimensional research report covering the national development of Liberia from 1960 all the way to 2023.
Yeah, and the visual design of the report you shared, it immediately sets the tone, right? There's this minimalist white cover, and right in the center is this stark gray topographical outline of Liberia.
Exactly. It signals exactly what we are about to do. Strip away the noise and look at the structural reality of a nation. It's built on millions of data points, pulling heavily from the World Bank and the worldwide governance indicators.
It's essentially a 60-year economic and social vital sign monitor. We are going to look at a nation transitioning from profound turmoil to a highly complex, deeply nuanced revival. And we're not just going to read you a spreadsheet.
No, far from it. The goal is to unpack the mechanics of survival and growth. We want to explore how a booming population reshapes physical infrastructure, how an economy fundamentally pivots its core engine, and why technological leaps sometimes outpace the laws meant to govern them.
Okay, let's unpack this. The data immediately forces us to look at the sheer scale of human momentum. When you open up to page 2, the population dynamics, the numbers are just staggering.
They really are.
The total population of Liberia in 1960 was roughly 1.14 million people. By 2023, that number had swelled to approximately 5.61 million.
And the visual representation here is crucial. The report uses this upward trending line chart for the total population from 1960 to 2023. You can see the distinct fluctuation, a noticeable dip in the 1990s corresponding to the conflict. But the overarching trajectory is just a steep, relentless climb.
Right.
The annual population growth rate remains at an exceptionally high 2.16% as of 2023.
Let's ground that 2.16% because, it sounds like a really small number if you're thinking about a savings account interest rate, but applied to human beings, it's explosive.
It is the mathematics of exponential compounding. A population growing steadily at 2.16% will completely double in size in just over 30 years.
Wow.
The report actually features an infographic of a population doubling time counter to emphasize exactly this. If you are a city planner, this means that every 3 decades you need twice as many roads, twice as many water pipes, and twice as many power lines.
Just to maintain the exact same standard of living you have today, you're running a marathon just to stay at the starting line.
Precisely. And the data reveals something even more intense when you look closely at who makes up that expanding number. On page 3, there's a population pyramid chart.
Oh, yeah, where the researchers literally drew a massive red circle around the base.
Yes, to highlight the extremely wide base. Historically, over 40% of the entire Liberian population has been between 0 and 14 years old. Even in 2023, it sat at 39.5%.
So 4 out of every 10 people are children.
Exactly. Which brings us to a concept the report explicitly identifies as the youth burden. They track the youth age dependency ratio, which compares the number of people too young to work against the number of working age adults.
And it was incredibly high, right?
Yes, it peaked historically around 85.9%, and while it has dropped to about 73.2% today, that is still a massive structural load.
Wait, if the dependency ratio is over 70%, that means virtually every single working adult is financially carrying a child, often multiple children, just on their own shoulders.
That is exactly what it means.
That completely wipes out any discretionary income. I mean, if you are spending every dollar you earn on basic calories, school uniforms, and pediatric medicine, there is absolutely zero left at the end of the month.
And the macroeconomic consequence of that vanishing discretionary income is profound. When working-age adults cannot accumulate household savings, those funds are never deposited into the local banking system.
Which means the banks have nothing to lend out.
The mechanism is a direct chain reaction. Without domestic deposits, banks cannot offer commercial loans at reasonable interest rates to local entrepreneurs. The baker can't get a loan for a new oven.
The farmer can't finance a tractor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Local businesses stagnate, formal jobs aren't created, and the national economy is systematically starved of domestic financial capital.
So we often hear economists throw around this buzzword, the demographic dividend, the idea that a massive generation of young people is this ultimate superpower that will drive future innovation. But looking at these mechanics, it feels less like a dividend and more like a burden.
This raises an important question. Why is it framed as a burden in our sources? A youth bulge only transitions into a demographic dividend under very strict conditions.
What kind of conditions?
The state must first possess the capacity to educate that entire generation to a globally competitive standard. Second, the economy must be generating high-productivity jobs ready to absorb them the moment they graduate.
Ah, okay.
Without those two components acting in perfect synchrony, the youth bulge remains strictly a dependency burden that drains current resources.
And building an economy capable of absorbing millions of young people requires an immense amount of stability, which makes the historical macroeconomic data on page 4 so crucial to understand.
Yes, the macro roller coaster.
The report tracks GDP per capita in current U.S. dollars, slowly growing from $167 in 1960 to $751 in 2023.
The endpoint suggests a slow, steady progression. But the journey between those two numbers, as illustrated by the area chart in the report, is chaotic.
Yeah, the chart literally has a shaded section labeled the collapse zone. This goes back to that terrifying negative 44.5% drop we mentioned at the start. That happened in 1990.
A catastrophic contraction.
And then there's an erratic jump in 1997 of positive 90.5%. When you look at the chart, it looks like an erratic heartbeat on an EKG. What actually happens to a society when the GDP halves in a single year?
You have to look at it through the lens of formal versus informal systems. A 44.5% contraction means the formal taxation system evaporates. When the state cannot collect revenue, it cannot pay the civil service.
So teachers, police officers, sanitation workers, they all stop getting paid.
Consequently, the currency rapidly loses trust and utility. The population is forcibly ejected from specialized labor and thrust back into subsistence agriculture and informal barter systems just to survive.
Wow.
The 90.5% bounce back in 1997 isn't an economic miracle. It's merely the mathematical artifact of a deeply depressed baseline temporarily resuming basic commercial activity.
But then you follow the timeline forward into the 2000s, and the chart features a very distinct green arrow pointing upward and to the right. The extreme volatility dampens, and a slow, steady rhythm of recovery takes hold.
However, the report is careful to note that while the trajectory is positive, the economy remains highly vulnerable to external shocks. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The underlying structural shift driving this green arrow. The engine of the economy is being fundamentally swapped out while the car is still moving.
This is page 5, right? The data tells a really surprising story about how people are actually making a living today. There's a stylized, flattened 3D bubble chart comparing agriculture, industry, and services.
And what does it show?
If you walk around Liberia, the vast majority of human labor is still happening in the agricultural sector. But the wealth is being generated somewhere else entirely. By 2023, the value added by the service sector had grown to $1.37 billion. Services are completely dwarfing agriculture in terms of actual GDP contribution.
The mechanism driving this disconnect is the labor productivity gap. Let's break down how value added works in this context. In Liberia, a significant portion of agricultural employment is still rooted in subsistence farming or low-yield crops.
Right.
It relies on intense manual labor. Because there is a lack of capital for mechanization, advanced irrigation, or high-quality fertilizers, the actual financial value produced by one farmer working a 10-hour day is incredibly low.
They are putting in massive amounts of physical energy, but the output is bottlenecked by a lack of technology.
Correct. Now contrast that with the service sector, which includes telecommunications, finance, digital retail, and logistics. The labor productivity rate here is exponentially higher.
Oh, I see.
A single worker in a mobile money kiosk or a telecom support center is facilitating digital transactions that generate significantly more gross domestic product per hour than manual farming. Even though agriculture holds the sheer volume of labor, the service sector has quietly become the absolute core of job absorption and value creation.
That makes total logical sense, but it brings up a glaring contradiction. If domestic savings are low because of the youth burden and the economy is still recovering, where is the money coming from to fuel this service sector and basic survival? You can't start a mobile network with barter and subsistence crops.
That leads directly to page 6 and 7, into the data on resource dependence and foreign lifelines. When a developing economy lacks domestic capital, it has no choice but to look outward. And the report highlights two primary external strategies.
Let's start with the environmental strategy, because the report includes a literal warning icon next to this data point on page 6. It's tracking net forest depletion.
A critical metric.
In the 1990s, the monetary value of forest depletion was hovering around $10 million annually. By 2022, that number had skyrocketed to $197 million. The step chart looks like a staircase going straight up.
This is the hallmark of a resource-dependent growth model. If you don't have the domestic capital to build high-tech manufacturing, the fastest way to generate national income is to extract and export natural resources. In this case, timber.
Right.
The metric of total natural resource rents as a percentage of GDP remains uncomfortably high.
So the country is essentially selling off its natural savings account, the forests, while relying on unpredictable foreign allowances to balance the checkbook.
That's a very apt analogy. And the warning icon in the report makes it clear they are hitting the absolute limit of the environment's carrying capacity. It is structurally unsustainable over the long term.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is why the second external strategy is so critical: international financial inflows. Page 7 presents a comparative bar chart showing foreign direct investment, or FDI, and official development assistance, or ODA.
But looking at the chart, these lifelines are wildly unstable. FDI, which is private foreign capital, is highly volatile. It spiked to a massive $1.03 billion back in 2011, but it drops and surges unpredictably.
Exactly.
And ODA, which is foreign aid from other governments, had its own massive peak around 2010 of roughly $1.3 billion.
We need to unpack that 2010 ODA peak, because it perfectly illustrates the mechanics of international aid. The report specifically annotates that $1.3 billion spike.
What caused it?
It was deeply tied to international debt relief programs.
So it was an accounting maneuver.
Largely, yes. Debt relief provides an immediate, massive influx of fiscal breathing room. It means the government no longer has to take its current tax revenues and instantly wire them overseas to service historical loans.
Right. That frees up money to be spent internally.
However, clearing a debt slate does not automatically build a domestic industry. It stops the bleeding, but it doesn't grow the muscle. This reveals the extreme fragility of an economy exposed to both global commodity price shocks and the changing political winds of foreign aid donors.
Yeah, if a donor country faces a domestic recession and cuts their foreign aid budget, the balance of payments takes a direct hit. But, just as you start to think the structural challenges are insurmountable, you turn to page 8.
The infrastructure data.
Exactly. And the data completely flips the narrative. We see an area where Liberia didn't just walk forward, but completely sprinted into the future.
The phenomenon of technological leapfrogging. This is where the lack of legacy infrastructure actually becomes an accelerant for modernization.
The report features a dual-axis line chart that is just fascinating. On one axis, you have fixed telephone line, landlines. That line is practically flatlining at the bottom of the chart. It's just continually shrinking.
Right, technology substitution.
Exactly. And on the other axis, you have mobile cellular subscriptions per 100 people. In the year 2000, it was near 0. By 2023, it exploded to 95.3.
What that chart visualizes is a society completely bypassing an entire era of industrial development. Because traditional infrastructure like copper wires and telephone poles was either destroyed or never built, the country bypassed the landline era entirely and adopted cellular tech.
It's like skipping the era of VHS tapes and DVDs and going straight to streaming video on a smartphone. Why lay copper wire when you can build a cell tower?
The efficiency gains are astronomical. But the true socioeconomic revolution isn't just making phone calls. The report annotates a major inflection point right around 2015.
Oh, the penetration of mobile payments.
Yes. Mobile payments solved the lack of physical banking infrastructure we discussed earlier. Think about the physical logistics of establishing a traditional banking network. You need secure buildings, armored trucks, unpaved rural roads to navigate, and complex central clearinghouses.
A total logistical nightmare.
But mobile money creates a newly formalized digital economy that bypasses all that physical friction. The SIM card acts as a secure, decentralized bank account. A farmer in a remote village can receive funds instantly via a digital ping.
It's a digital fast lane. But, while a cell phone connects you to the world, you still need to be able to read the screen. Which leads directly into page 9 and 10, the foundational elements of human capital, education, and health.
Human capital is the true baseline of any sustained recovery. And the data here presents a deeply nuanced picture of surviving versus thriving.
Let's look at public health first. The report has a scatter plot with a trend line, tracking under 5 mortality. In 1990, the mortality rate was 246.1 per 1,000 live births.
Devastatingly high.
By 2023, it plummeted to 57.0. The report annotates this with a massive call-out, a 76% decline.
A 76% drop in child mortality is a monumental victory for basic maternal and infant health interventions. But we have to look at the duality of these statistics. That steep decline is primarily driven by targeted, highly scalable interventions.
Like distributing vaccines or mosquito nets?
Exactly. You can literally airdrop these solutions into a community and see an immediate drop in mortality. But then you look at the data right next to it. Neonatal deaths, infants dying in the first 28 days of life.
Right.
That number dropped from about 20,000 in 1990 to 7,400 in 2023. It's a decline, but a much slower one. And then on page 11, there is the sanitation data.
Yeah, the report highlights this with a stark red negative arrow. Rural open defecation dropped from 74.7% in 2000 to 63.7% in 2022, but it remains stubbornly high. Basic drinking water coverage reached about 75.8% nationally, but there's a massive urban-rural gap shown in the stacked bar chart.
This reveals the limits of basic interventions. You cannot distribute a neonatal intensive care unit in a cardboard box.
Wow, yeah.
Reducing neonatal mortality requires continuous electricity for incubators and highly trained nursing staff. Similarly, eradicating open defecation requires laying underground municipal sewer systems. It requires deep structural stake capacity.
The easy wins have largely been achieved. What's left is the dense structural work. And that exact same friction appears when we look at the educational data on page 9.
By literacy metrics.
The report uses a slope chart. Overall, adult literacy rose from 32.1% in 1984 to 59.4% in 2017. A solid upward trajectory. But then it breaks down the youth demographic, the 15 to 24-year-olds. The male youth literacy rate is 83.8%, but the female youth literacy rate is at 63.2%.
And the report physically circles this 20-point gender gap.
So what does this all mean? If the youth bulge is the future, leaving half the population behind linguistically and educationally caps the nation's potential.
What's fascinating here is how we can connect this female literacy deficit directly back to the economic dependency ratio from Section 1. Releasing the potential of female human capital is the only mathematical way to turn the youth burden into a demographic dividend.
Because if a young woman cannot read, she is locked out of that high-productivity service sector. She stays in the low-yield agricultural sector, which historically correlates with higher birth rates, which just feeds the extreme base of that population pyramid.
Precisely. Closing that literacy gap isn't just a social equity goal, it is the macroeconomic engine. But education for women is just one piece of the puzzle. Their legal and political standing is the other half of that equation.
Which brings us to page 12, the legal awakening and gender law. The report features a progress bar tracking the Women, Business, and the Law Index, and the progress is massive. The score jumped from an abysmal 43.75 prior to the year 2000 up to 81.25 in 2023.
On paper, the legal framework has systematically improved.
Yet, right next to that progress bar is an infographic showing female parliamentary seats. That number fluctuates, but it hovers around just 10.7% in 2023.
This divergence perfectly illustrates the difference between legislative reform and entrenched political reality. Passing laws to grant women economic rights on paper boosting the index score is easier than dismantling the entrenched political systems, keeping their parliamentary representation at 10%.
The legal software has upgraded much faster than the political hardware can process it. And that concept is the exact lens we need to look at the macro governance indicators on page 13.
The Worldwide Governance Indicators, or WGI. The report uses a radar chart to display the 6 major dimensions.
There is a very clear, significant rise post-2006 in the dimension of voice and accountability.
That spike shows a flourishing democratic discourse taking root. Citizens are participating in selecting their government, and there is freedom of expression. But then you look at the other dimensions.
Yeah, control of corruption is consistently trapped in the bottom 20th percentile globally, sitting at 20.8 in 2023. And rule of law shows only slight improvement post-2010, remaining at a very low level.
The institutional execution is lagging.
It's like upgrading a computer software, the voice and accountability and legal frameworks, while the actual hardware, the control of corruption and rule of law, is still broken, causing the whole system to run slowly.
That institutional lag is the ultimate barrier. If we link this back to the foreign lifelines we discussed earlier, it explains a lot. Official development assistance foreign aid is somewhat insensitive to governance metrics, but foreign direct investment is private money.
And private money hates risk.
Exactly. If a multinational CEO is looking to build a new factory, they look at that 20.8 percentile in control of corruption. To them, corruption isn't just a governance issue. It is a massive, unpredictable, hidden tax. If they don't know if a local court will enforce a property right impartially, they simply won't invest.
So this institutional bottleneck is preventing short-term foreign aid from transforming into long-term sustainable domestic investment.
Correct.
And as the economy tries to modernize, despite these bottlenecks, a new global challenge is quietly rising in the background. Page 14 looks at the environmental toll.
The greenhouse gas emissions data.
The report features a combination chart overlaying GDP growth with emissions. Total greenhouse gas emissions, excluding land use changes, doubled from 1.61 megatons in 1990 to 3.25 megatons in 2021.
And the report specifically annotates methane, CH4, as a primary culprit, linking it directly to agriculture and waste management.
Why methane specifically?
This examines the tension between economic recovery and environmental impact. As the country rebuilds and expands agricultural activity to feed that rapidly growing population, methane emissions organically rise. The cultivation of rice paddies and raising livestock are inherently high methane processes.
We're looking at a nation contributing minimally to global emissions, yet bearing the brunt of climate change, and now their own recovery is pushing their internal emissions up. It's a cruel irony.
The inequity is stark. The data shows that the low-carbon transition in Liberia cannot be solved by solar panels alone. It requires a fundamental modernization of the agricultural sector and waste management.
Which ties right back to the open defecation and sanitation data from earlier.
Exactly. Poor waste management isn't just a public health crisis. It's an environmental and emissions crisis, too. As urban populations expand without municipal wastewater treatment, organic waste decomposes in the open, releasing massive volumes of methane. The solutions for public health and climate are entirely symbiotic here.
It's incredible how tightly braided all of these data points are. You can't solve the methane without the waste management, you can't solve the waste management without upgrading the governance, and you can't upgrade the governance without educating the massive youth population.
Which brings us to the conclusion on page 15. The researchers synthesized this 60-year journey into 3 core imperatives.
Let's pull this all together for you, the listener. Based on everything we've unpacked, here are the 3 core conclusions. First, demographic destiny. That giant youth population is a ticking clock. Education, specifically erasing that gender literacy gap, is the only way to diffuse the burden and ignite a dividend.
Second, the quality over quantity of growth. The economy must pivot from hacking down forests and relying on resource extraction to investing heavily in the digital and service sectors.
And third, the governance key. All the aid and tech in the world won't stick without the rule of law and corruption control. The report describes this with a final visual, a massive right-pointing arrow connecting education, health, and governance straight toward the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals.
Data witnesses progress, and logic guides the future.
Beautifully said. But before we go, we always like to leave you with something to mull over.
I actually have a final thought that builds on this data. We spent a significant amount of time marveling at the digital leapfrog, how technological leapfrogging allowed Liberia to skip the landline and go straight to mobile.
Right.
So, could a similar institutional leapfrog exist? We know upgrading physical governance hardware takes generations. But can a fragile state use emerging digital transparency tools like blockchain ledgers or AI-driven auditing systems to bypass decades of traditional, slow-moving anti-corruption reforms and instantly secure its rule of law?
Wow. Replacing the vulnerable human-led auditing process with an unalterable digital ledger. If you can leapfrog the physical bank, maybe you really can leapfrog the corrupt auditor. That is a brilliant paradigm to consider. Well, to our listener, thank you so much for bringing us such profound, world-expanding sources to the table. This has been our deep dive for today. Keep asking the big questions.